The piercing cries of a newborn cut through the chaos of the burning great hall like a knife. Smoke choked the air. Flames crackled from shattered beams overhead. Elyndra's legs buckled as soldiers dragged her forward through the blood-slicked floor, her body shaking with exhaustion and raw terror. She clutched her tiny daughter desperately to her chest, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. Everything was gone, her village reduced to ash, her family slaughtered before her eyes. Now she was just another broken war prize waiting for death or worse. The soldiers shoved her into the center of the hall. Captives whimpered around her. Then everything seemed to stop. Prince Vaelthorn, the coldest Alpha Prince in history, the merciless conqueror who had burned entire packs to the ground, turned away from his generals mid-command. His icy gaze locked onto the screaming infant in her arms. Without hesitation, the battle-hardened warrior stepped through the smoke and carnage, and reached out with those blood-stained hands to hold the baby for the first time. Chapter 1. The piercing cries of a newborn cut through the chaos of the burning great hall like a knife. Smoke choked the air, thick and acrid, curling into Elyndra's lungs with every desperate breath. Flames roared overhead, devouring the ancient wooden beams of what had once been her village's proud meeting hall. The crackle of fire mixed with the distant screams of the dying and the harsh shouts of conquering soldiers. Her legs buckled beneath her as two burly warriors dragged her forward across the blood-slicked stone floor. Elyndra clutched her tiny daughter, barely 3 weeks old, to her chest with trembling arms. The baby's wails pierced her heart sharper than any blade. She had nothing left. Her home had been reduced to ash in a single night. Her parents, her younger brother, the gentle healer who had helped deliver little Lyra, all gone. Slaughtered before her eyes while she hid in the root cellar, praying the gods would spare her child. Now she was just another broken war prize. Another nameless captive in the hands of the most ruthless force the realm had ever known. "Move it, Omega scum," one of the soldiers growled, shoving her roughly into the center of the hall. Elyndra stumbled, barely keeping her balance. Around her, other survivors whimpered and huddled together, mostly women and children, their faces streaked with soot and tears. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the bitter scent of burning thatch. Elyndra's heart hammered so violently she feared it might shatter. She kept her head down, trying to make herself small, invisible. "Please," she prayed silently, rocking her screaming daughter. "Let them pass us by. Let them take someone else." But the soldiers had other orders. A heavy silence suddenly fell over the hall as a tall, imposing figure turned away from a cluster of his generals. The flames seemed to dim in his presence. Prince Vaelthorn. He was exactly as the legends described, taller than any man had a right to be, broad-shouldered and clad in black armor still stained with the blood of her people. His silver-white hair was tied back severely, revealing a face carved from ice and stone, sharp cheekbones, a cruel mouth and eyes the color of frozen midnight. The coldest Alpha Prince in history. The conqueror who had burned entire packs to the ground without a flicker of remorse. They said he had never smiled, never shown mercy, never felt anything at all. Elyndra's breath caught in her throat as his gaze swept across the captives, and locked directly onto her. Oh, not her. Onto the screaming infant in her arms. Time seemed to fracture. Prince Vaelthorn stepped away from his generals mid-sentence, his heavy boots echoing across the blood-stained floor. Every soldier in the hall froze. Even the flames appeared to hesitate. He moved with the lethal grace of a predator, yet there was something unnaturally focused in the way he approached her. Elyndra's knees nearly gave out. She tightened her grip on little Lyra, terror flooding every vein. He's going to kill her. He's going to rip her from my arms and dash her against the stones, just to silence the noise. But Prince Vaelthorn did not reach for a sword. Instead, those large, battle-hardened hands, still smeared with the blood of her village, extended toward her with shocking gentleness. "Give her to me." His voice was low, commanding and colder than the northern winds. Yet there was something beneath it. A roughness. A hesitation no one in the hall had ever heard from him before. Elyndra stared at him, tears cutting clean trails through the soot on her cheeks. Her arms shook violently. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect her child with her last breath. But the soldiers behind her pressed closer, and the prince's presence was overwhelming, like standing before an avalanche that had chosen for one impossible moment not to fall. With a broken sob, she slowly loosened her grip and placed her precious daughter into the Alpha Prince's waiting arms. The moment Vaelthorn's hands closed around the tiny wriggling bundle, something extraordinary happened. The baby's piercing cries quieted. Not instantly but gradually, softening into small hiccuping whimpers as the prince instinctively cradled her against his armored chest. One massive hand supported her head with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man who had conquered kingdoms. His icy gaze dropped to the infant's tear-streaked face, and for the briefest second the merciless mask cracked. He held her. The coldest Alpha Prince in history was holding a baby for the first time. A ripple of stunned silence spread through the hall. Generals exchanged uneasy glances. Soldiers shifted uncomfortably as if witnessing something forbidden. Elyndra could only stare, her empty arms aching, her heart caught between terror and a fragile, impossible spark of hope. Vaelthorn's thumb brushed ever so lightly across the baby's cheek, wiping away a tear. The infant let out one final tiny sigh and nestled closer to him, as if she had been waiting for this exact moment. For the first time in known memory, Prince Vaelthorn's expression softened, just a fraction but enough that Elyndra saw it. The hard line of his jaw eased. His frozen eyes held something raw, something almost human. Then his gaze lifted and met hers. "You will come with me," he said, his voice still cold but carrying a new, dangerous undertone. "Both of you." Elyndra's world tilted. She had expected death. She had expected brutality. She had not expected this. As two soldiers stepped forward to escort her, Prince Vaelthorn turned and strode toward the shattered doors of the burning hall, still cradling her daughter protectively against his chest, as though the tiny life in his arms was suddenly the most precious thing in his conquered realm. And Elyndra, heart pounding with fear and confusion, was forced to follow the man who had destroyed everything she loved, and who now held her entire world in his blood-stained hands. Chapter 2. The night air outside the burning hall was bitterly cold, a sharp contrast to the inferno they had left behind. Elyndra stumbled forward, her bare feet scraping against frozen mud and debris as two of Prince Vaelthorn's soldiers marched her behind their lord. Her arms felt painfully empty without Lyra. Every few steps she caught a glimpse of the prince ahead, his tall, armored frame cutting through the chaos of the war camp like a blade through silk. Her daughter was still nestled against his chest, impossibly quiet. How? Elyndra's mind screamed. How can a monster like him calm her when I've spent 3 weeks fighting to keep her alive? The war camp sprawled across the valley like a wound upon the land. Tents billowed in the wind, torches flickered against the darkness, and the metallic scent of blood mixed with wood smoke and wet earth. Soldiers moved with disciplined efficiency, tending to wounds, sharpening weapons and hauling supplies. None dared look directly at their prince as he passed. Whispers followed in his wake, but they died quickly. Elyndra's body ached. Her back burned from where a soldier had struck her during the raid. Her breasts were heavy and painful with milk she had barely been able to feed Lyra amid the terror. Grief sat like a stone in her throat, memories of her mother's scream, her father's body falling, the way the roof had collapsed on the healer who had helped bring Lyra into this cruel world. She had nothing left but her daughter. And now even she was in the hands of the coldest Alpha Prince in history. They stopped before a large command tent reinforced with black banners bearing the sigil of a frozen thorned crown. Prince Vaelthorn ducked inside without a word. The soldiers shoved Elyndra in after him. The interior was stark and militaristic. A heavy oak table covered in maps and reports, a single iron brazier casting dancing shadows and furs piled in one corner. No luxury. No softness. Just power and function. Vaelthorn stood near the center, carefully lowering little Lyra into a makeshift nest of clean furs one of his aides had hurriedly arranged. The baby stirred but did not cry. His large hand lingered for a moment, fingers brushing the infant's cheek with that same impossible gentleness from the hall. Then the mask returned. He straightened, turning to face Elyndra with eyes like frozen steel. The warmth she had glimpsed for a few heartbeats was gone. "You are Elyndra," he stated. It was not a question. His voice was low, clipped, and utterly devoid of emotion. Omega. Survivor of Blackthorn Village. Mother to this child. Elyndra's knees nearly buckled. How did he know her name? She hadn't spoken it. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the trembling that had taken over her body. "Yes, my lord," she whispered, voice hoarse from smoke and screaming. Vaelthorn studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. She could feel the weight of his gaze, assessing, calculating, cold. This was the man who had raised 3 packs in the last year alone. The man whose name mothers used to scare disobedient children. You will remain here, he said finally. Both of you. Under my protection. Elyndra's head snapped up. Protection? The word felt like a cruel joke after everything she had witnessed. One of his generals, a scarred older alpha named Garrick, stepped forward. My prince, with respect. She is a war captive. The men will expect. The men will expect what I tell them to expect. Vaelthorn cut him off, his tone like ice cracking. She belongs to me now. The child as well. See that they are fed, cleaned, and given proper clothing. The healer will attend to them both at first light. Garrick bowed stiffly, shooting Elyndra a wary glance before retreating. When they were alone, save for the quiet breathing of her daughter, Vaelthorn turned back to the table, studying his maps as if the last 10 minutes had not upended her entire world. Elyndra gathered what little courage she had left. Why? The word escaped her before she could stop it. Why spare us? Why, hold her. For a moment she thought he would ignore her. Then his shoulders tensed slightly. I do not explain myself to captives, he said without looking up. You are alive because I willed it. That is enough. Tears welled in Elyndra's eyes again. The grief, the exhaustion, the terror of not knowing what this man truly wanted from her. It all crashed down at once. She sank to her knees on the cold ground, unable to stand any longer. Please, she whispered brokenly. If you're going to kill me, do it quickly. But don't take her from me. She's all I have left. The silence that followed was deafening. Prince Vaelthorn finally looked at her again. Something flickered across his face, too fast for her to name. Not quite softness, not quite pity, but a crack. A fracture in the ice. You misunderstand, little Omega, he said, his voice quieter now. I have no intention of killing either of you. You will serve in my household. Your daughter will be cared for. He stepped closer until he towered over her kneeling form. Elyndra kept her gaze on the ground, heart thundering. Look at me. She slowly raised her eyes. Up close he was even more terrifying and strangely beautiful. The hard lines of his face, the silver strands of hair that had escaped their tie, the faint scar that ran along his jaw. You fear me, he observed. It was not an accusation. Simply truth. Yes, she breathed. Good, he replied. Fear keeps you alive in my world. He turned away abruptly, calling for servants. 2 beta women entered quickly, carrying warm water, clean cloths, and simple but warm clothing. See to her needs, Vaelthorn ordered. The child stays with me tonight. Elyndra's head jerked up in panic. No, please. But he was already walking toward the fir nest where Lyra slept peacefully, completely unaware of the monster watching over her. As the servants gently helped Elyndra to her feet and began tending to her wounds and filth, she couldn't tear her eyes away from the Coldest Alpha Prince. He sat down near the baby, one massive hand resting protectively beside her tiny body. His expression remained unreadable, but he did not move from that spot. Elyndra's heart twisted with a terrifying mix of hatred, fear, and the tiniest, most dangerous seed of confused hope. She had entered this tent expecting death. Instead, she had become the personal captive of a man who had destroyed her world, yet held her daughter like she was made of fragile starlight. And she had no idea which version of Prince Vaelthorn was more dangerous. Chapter 3. Dawn crept over the war camp with a pale, reluctant light. Elyndra had barely slept. The simple cot the servants had prepared for her felt too soft after weeks of hiding in damp cellars and root holes. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flames and blood. Every time she drifted off, she woke with a start, heart racing, listening for her daughter's cry. But Lyra had not cried once during the night. Elyndra sat up slowly, wincing at the bruises covering her body. The beta servants had cleaned her wounds and dressed her in a simple woolen gown the color of storm clouds. It was far finer than anything she had owned in her village. She touched the fabric nervously as if it might burn her. The tent flap opened. Prince Vaelthorn entered, still wearing his armor from the night before, though the blood had been wiped clean. In his arms, Lyra slept peacefully against his chest, wrapped in a soft black fur. The sight stole the breath from Elyndra's lungs. He looked different in the morning light. Still terrifying. Still untouchable. But there were faint shadows under his eyes as if he too had not slept. "You're awake," he said. His voice carried the same cold authority as the night before. Elyndra rose quickly, keeping her gaze lowered. "My lord, please, may I hold her?" Vaelthorn studied her for a long moment. Then with surprising care he crossed the tent and placed Lyra into her waiting arms. The baby stirred, let out a small contented sound and nuzzled into her mother's neck. Elyndra's eyes burned with tears as she breathed in her daughter's scent. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," he replied. He moved to the oak table and unrolled a fresh map. "You will serve as my personal attendant. You and the child will remain in my quarters at all times. You will tend to my needs during the day and care for the infant at night." Elyndra's stomach twisted. "Personal attendant?" "Yes." He didn't look up. "You will bring my meals, maintain this tent, assist with my armor when required and remain within my sight. The child stays close to you. That is the arrangement." Her hands tightened around Lyra. This was no kindness. This was ownership. She was now bound to the man who had destroyed her life, forced into constant intimate proximity with him. "I am not trained for such service," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "I was a healer's apprentice in my village. Not a servant to royalty." Vaelthorn finally lifted his gaze. Those frozen midnight eyes pinned her in place. "You will learn. Quickly." A heavy silence fell between them. Elyndra could feel the power rolling off him in waves. The raw alpha dominance that made lesser wolves want to bare their throats. She fought the instinct, lifting her chin just slightly. "And if I refuse?" The words slipped out before she could stop them. The prince's expression didn't change, but the air in the tent grew colder. He stepped closer until he stood directly in front of her. He was so tall she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You will not refuse," he said softly, dangerously. "Because you know what happens to those who defy me. And because this child," his gloved hand reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Lyra's forehead, "deserves to live. Do we understand each other?" Elyndra's heart hammered. She hated how gentle his touch was with her daughter. She hated how it made something inside her chest flutter with dangerous confusion. "Yes, my lord," she whispered. "Good." He turned away and began issuing orders. Servants entered and exited in a steady stream, bringing breakfast, fresh water, and clothing for both her and the baby. Vaelthorn ate quickly while standing, never once relaxing his posture. Elyndra was given a plate of warm porridge and roasted meat, far more food than she had seen in weeks. She ate mechanically, never taking her eyes off the prince. As the morning progressed, the forced proximity became painfully real. She was expected to stay within arm's reach. When Vaelthorn moved to inspect his troops outside the tent, she followed, carrying Lyra wrapped securely against her chest. When he met with his generals at the war table, she stood silently in the corner, trying to make herself invisible while feeling every pair of eyes on her. Garrick, the scarred general, watched her with open suspicion. "My prince, is this wise? Bringing a war captive so close?" "She is mine," Vaelthorn cut him off sharply. "Question me again and you will lose your tongue." The general bowed and said nothing more. Hours passed in tense silence. Elyndra fetched water, folded furs, and helped adjust pieces of the prince's armor when he prepared to ride out briefly. Each time their hands brushed, she felt a strange spark. Part fear, part something she refused to name. By midday Lyra grew fussy. Elyndra sat in the corner of the tent to nurse her, turning her back for as much privacy as she could manage. She expected Vaelthorn to leave or turn away. He did neither. The prince remained at his table writing reports, but she could feel his gaze occasionally drift toward her. Not with lust. Not with cruelty. With something quieter. Almost watchful. Protective. When Lyra finished feeding and fell asleep again, Elyndra rocked her gently, humming an old lullaby from her village. The melody felt fragile in this place of war and conquest. Vaelthorn suddenly spoke, his voice low. "What is her name?" Elyndra blinked, surprised he had asked. "Lyra," she answered softly. "After my grandmother." He nodded once as if committing it to memory. Then he returned to his work. As the sun began to set, the weight of the day settled heavily on Elyndra. Her body was still healing. Her heart was still shattered. And now she was trapped in the most dangerous position imaginable, living in the private space of the Coldest Alpha Prince, breathing the same air, serving his every need. She hated him for what he had done. Yet when she watched him unconsciously adjust the furs around Elyndra later that evening, making sure the baby was warm, the hatred felt complicated. Vaelthorn caught her staring. "Something troubles you, Omega?" he asked. Elyndra swallowed hard. "Everything troubles me, my lord. You burned my home. Killed my family. And now you keep us here like pets." For the first time she saw a real reaction. His jaw tightened. His hand stilled on the map. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. "The world is cruel, Elyndra. I did not make it so. I only survived it." He stepped closer, towering over her once more. But this time there was no overt threat in his posture. "You will sleep here tonight as well," he said. "Beside the child. I will take the far side of the tent." Elyndra's breath caught. The forced proximity was becoming even more intimate. As night fell and the camp quieted outside, she lay on the furs with Elyndra nestled between them. Prince Vaelthorn remained awake for a long time, sitting with his back against a tent pole, watching the entrance with a predator's vigilance. Elyndra closed her eyes, pretending to sleep, but her mind raced. She was now bound to him, day and night. And deep down, beneath the fear and grief, she wondered how long the ice around Prince Vaelthorn's heart could truly last, when a tiny baby and her broken mother were slowly melting it from within. Chapter 4. The next 3 days blurred into a strange, tense rhythm inside Prince Vaelthorn's world. Elyndra woke each morning to the sound of the war camps stirring, the clang of armor, the low growls of orders, the distant howl of wolves on patrol. But inside the command tent, a fragile pocket of quiet had formed around her and Elyndra. A pocket ruled by the Coldest Alpha Prince. On the morning of the 4th day she stirred to find Vaelthorn already awake. He sat cross-legged near the brazier, his massive frame somehow gentle as he held Elyndra against his chest. The baby was wide awake, tiny fists waving as she made soft cooing sounds. One of the prince's large fingers was carefully wrapped in her grip. Elyndra froze on her cot, watching in stunned silence. Vaelthorn was speaking, so quietly she almost missed it. His voice, usually sharp as frost, had softened into something rough and unfamiliar. "And then the scouts returned with news of the Eastern Pass. Your mother would be proud of how strong you are, little one." He was telling her daughter a story. A war story, stripped of its violence, turned into something almost soothing. Elyndra gurgled happily in response, her small hand patting his armored chest. Elyndra's throat tightened. The sight was so wildly out of place. This merciless conqueror, known across the realm for leaving nothing but ruin in his wake, murmuring to an infant like she was the center of his universe. He noticed her watching. Without a word, he rose and crossed the tent, carefully transferring Elyndra into Elyndra's arms. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. His skin was warm despite the cold morning air. "She was restless before dawn," he said simply. "I walked with her so you could rest." Elyndra searched his face, looking for the trap. There was none she could see. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with conflicting emotions. He gave a single nod and returned to his maps, but the crack in his armor had already widened. Throughout the day, the small intimacies continued, each one chipping away at the ice around him. When Elyndra struggled to reach a high shelf while organizing his supplies, Vaelthorn appeared behind her without sound. He lifted the heavy chest down with one arm, placing it gently at her feet. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The act itself spoke louder than any command. Later, when Elyndra became fussy during a long strategy meeting with his generals, Vaelthorn dismissed the men early, something Elyndra had never seen him do. He then surprised her by taking the baby again, pacing slowly around the tent while humming a low, rumbling melody that vibrated through his chest. The sound was deep and soothing, like distant thunder wrapped in warmth. Elyndra sat on the furs watching him. Her heart ached with a painful mix of resentment and unwanted tenderness. This was the same man whose soldiers had burned her village. The same man whose orders had ended countless lives. Yet here he was, cradling her daughter like she was the most fragile treasure in existence. That evening, as she prepared his evening meal, Vaelthorn did something even more unexpected. He noticed her wince when she bent to pick up a fallen bowl. The bruise on her lower back from the raid still throbbed. "Sit," he ordered, though his tone lacked its usual frost. When she hesitated, he repeated it more quietly. "Sit, Elyndra." She obeyed, lowering herself onto the furs with Lyra in her lap. Vaelthorn disappeared briefly and returned with a small jar of healing salve, one of the expensive ones usually reserved for high-ranking warriors. He knelt in front of her. Elyndra's breath caught. The Coldest Alpha Prince was on his knees. "Lift your gown," he said. When she stiffened, he added, "Only enough to reach the injury. I will not harm you." Her hands trembled as she pulled the fabric aside just enough to reveal the ugly purple bruise along her spine. Vaelthorn's touch was clinical at first, but careful. So careful. His calloused fingers spread the cool salve with surprising skill, working it gently into her skin. The contact sent strange sparks racing through her body. Fear, confusion, and something warmer she refused to acknowledge. "You should have told me it still pained you," he said, voice low. "I didn't think it mattered," she whispered. "It matters." The words hung between them, heavy and dangerous. When he finished, he wiped his hands and stood. For a moment their eyes locked. His midnight gaze held hers longer than necessary. Elyndra felt exposed, raw, as if he could see every fractured piece of her soul. That night, as they settled for sleep once more, Lyra nestled safely between them. Elyndra found herself unable to rest. The prince remained awake again, keeping watch as always. After a long silence, she spoke into the darkness. "Why are you doing this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Why show us kindness when your reputation says you have none?" Vaelthorn was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then softly, "Because the moment I held her, something inside me remembered what it felt like to be small. To be helpless. To need protection." He turned his head slightly toward her in the dim light of the brazier. "And because you look at me like I am both monster and salvation. I find I do not entirely hate it." Elyndra's heart stuttered. She pulled Lyra closer, trying to steady her breathing. The ice was cracking faster now, and she was terrified of what would spill out when it finally shattered. Chapter 5. The fragile peace inside Prince Vaelthorn's tent could not last. By the 5th day, whispers had spread throughout the war camp like wildfire. The Coldest Alpha Prince had taken a war captive as his personal attendant, and worse, he was showing unprecedented gentleness toward her child. Soldiers spoke in hushed tones. Generals exchanged uneasy glances. And in the shadows, resentment began to fester. Elyndra felt the shift in the air as she carried a tray of food back from the cook's tent. The stares were heavier now. Some curious, some hostile. She kept her head down and Lyra secured tightly against her chest, hurrying toward the safety of Vaelthorn's quarters. She had almost reached the tent when trouble found her. A tall, broad-shouldered alpha stepped into her path. Lord Kaelin, one of Vaelthorn's most trusted commanders and a rival who had long coveted more power. His eyes gleamed with cruel amusement as he looked her up and down. "So this is the little Omega who's softened our fearless prince," he sneered. "Pathetic. Hiding behind a baby to earn his favor." Elyndra's heart raced. She tried to step around him, but he blocked her again. "Move aside," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. Kaelin laughed, low and mocking. "Or what? You'll run crying to Vaelthorn?" He leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. "He'll grow tired of you soon enough. And when he does, I'll be waiting. Perhaps I'll take the child for myself. Raise her as a proper warrior instead of this weak." A deep, guttural growl ripped through the air. Prince Vaelthorn appeared like a storm given form. In 3 powerful strides he was between them, his hand shooting out to grip Kaelin by the throat. He lifted the larger alpha off the ground with terrifying ease. "You dare threaten what is mine?" Vaelthorn's voice was pure ice, laced with lethal fury. His eyes burned with possessive rage. "Touch her again, speak to her again, and I will tear your spine from your body while you still breathe." Kaelin gasped for air, clawing at Vaelthorn's iron grip. Soldiers gathered at a distance, watching in stunned silence. Vaelthorn threw him to the ground like discarded waste. "Get out of my sight." As Kaelin scrambled away, coughing and humiliated, Vaelthorn turned to Elyndra. His expression shifted instantly. the feral rage melting into something protective and almost tender as he looked at her and Lyra. "Are you hurt?" he asked, voice rough. She shook her head, still trembling. "No, but he will not bother you again," Vaelthorn promised. His hand rose, hovering near her cheek for a moment before he pulled it back as if catching himself. "Come inside." A message from the creator. Before we continue with the story, I want to take a quick moment to speak directly to you. If you're enjoying the emotional tension and slow burn intimacy in this tale, I think you'll absolutely love my intense dark alpha romance audiobook series. A much spicier, more possessive and intensely raw experience that goes far beyond what YouTube allows. This is a completely different story from the one we're telling here. It features a dangerously obsessive alpha, darker themes, and scorching chemistry that will leave you breathless. Chapter 1 is completely free to listen to right now. You can find the link on my channel dashboard. If you crave that darker, more dominant alpha romance vibe, I highly recommend checking it out. Now back to our story. Vaelthorn guided Elyndra back into the tent with a hand placed gently at the small of her back. The moment the flap closed behind them, the full weight of what had just happened settled over her. He had defended her publicly, fiercely, possessively, and the look in his eyes when he faced Kaelin, it was the same icy fury he was known for across the realm, but this time it had been for her. Inside the tent, Vaelthorn paced like a caged wolf, tension rolling off his powerful frame. Lyra, sensing the heavy atmosphere, began to fuss. Without hesitation, the prince took the baby from Elyndra's arms and began rocking her, his movements instinctive now. "You should not have to endure such insults," he said, voice still edged with anger. "I will deal with Kaelin permanently if necessary." Elyndra watched him soothe her daughter, her heart twisting painfully. The contrast was dizzying. This man who could destroy armies with a word, yet held her child with such care. "Why do you protect us so fiercely?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are nothing to you. Just war spoils." Vaelthorn stopped pacing. He looked at her over Lyra's small head, his midnight eyes intense and unreadable. "You are not spoils," he said slowly. "Not anymore." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Outside, the wind howled through the camp. Inside, the ice around the Coldest Alpha Prince was fracturing faster than ever, and Elyndra feared she was already falling into the depths of whatever lay beneath. But with Kaelin's threat lingering in the air, she knew their fragile peace was about to be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. Chapter 6. The attack came at midnight. Elyndra woke to the sound of steel clashing and savage growls just outside the tent. Lyra's terrified wail pierced the chaos. She bolted upright, heart slamming against her ribs, and lunged for her daughter. "Vaelthorn!" she cried. The prince was already moving, a blur of lethal motion. He snatched his sword from beside his cot and shoved Elyndra and Lyra behind him with one powerful arm. "Stay down." The tent flap ripped open. 3 shadowed figures burst inside, assassins wearing Kaelin's sigil beneath dark cloaks. One of them made straight for Elyndra and the screaming baby. Time slowed. Elyndra clutched Lyra to her chest, backing into the corner as the attacker swung a dagger toward them. She screamed, twisting her body to shield her child. The blade never reached her. Vaelthorn's roar shook the tent poles. He moved like death incarnate, silver hair whipping as he drove his sword through the first assassin's chest. The second attacker barely had time to react before Vaelthorn's fist shattered his jaw, sending him crashing into the war table. The third assassin, faster and more desperate, lunged past him and grabbed for Lyra. "No!" Elyndra screamed, fighting wildly. The blade sliced across her shoulder as she turned to protect her daughter. White-hot pain exploded through her body. Blood soaked her gown instantly. Lyra's cries grew frantic. Vaelthorn's eyes blazed with primal fury. In one terrifying motion, he seized the assassin by the throat, slammed him against the ground, and drove his blade straight through the man's heart. Silence fell, broken only by the baby's sobs and Elyndra's ragged breathing. Vaelthorn dropped to his knees beside her, his hands shaking as he pressed them against her bleeding shoulder. "Elyndra, stay with me," he growled, voice hoarse. The legendary ice had completely shattered. His face was raw with fear, real unguarded fear. Blood continued to pour between his fingers. Elyndra's vision blurred. The pain was excruciating, But worse was the terror that she might leave Lyra alone in this brutal world. I can't, she gasped, her strength fading fast. Lyra, please protect her. You are not dying, Vaelthorn snarled as if he could command death itself to retreat. He gathered her into his arms, holding both her and Lyra against his chest. His voice cracked, the first time she had ever heard it do so. I will not lose you. Do you understand? I have spent my entire life cold and empty, until I held her. Until I saw you. You will not leave me now. Tears slipped down Elyndra's cheeks as her head grew heavy. She could feel herself slipping away, the world narrowing to the warmth of his body and the sound of Lyra's cries. Vaelthorn, she whispered, her hand weakly gripping his blood-stained armor. If I don't, promise me you'll keep her safe. His arms tightened around them both, trembling with barely contained power and desperation. I swear it on my blood and my throne, he vowed, voice breaking. But you will live, Elyndra. You will live because I need you. Because she needs you. Because I... He stopped, the words catching in his throat. But the truth burned in his eyes, raw, possessive and terrifyingly real. The healer burst into the tent moments later, summoned by the commotion. Vaelthorn refused to let Elyndra go, even as the healer worked frantically to staunch the bleeding and apply powerful herbs. As darkness threatened to pull her under, Elyndra looked up at the Coldest Alpha Prince, the man who had destroyed her world and was now fighting desperately to save what remained of it. In that moment, broken and bleeding in his arms, she realized the terrible truth. She was no longer just his captive. She was becoming something far more dangerous. Chapter 7. The fever came hard and fast. For 2 agonizing days, Elyndra drifted in and out of consciousness while the healer worked tirelessly. The wound on her shoulder had turned angry and inflamed despite the herbs. Each time she woke, she found Prince Vaelthorn beside her. He never left. On the 3rd night, the fever finally broke. Elyndra opened her eyes to the soft glow of the brazier and the sight of Vaelthorn sitting on the edge of her cot, elbows on his knees, head bowed. Lyra slept peacefully in the fir nest nearby, safe and cared for. Vaelthorn, she whispered, her voice weak and raspy. His head snapped up. The relief that flooded his face was so raw it stole what little breath she had left. The Coldest Alpha Prince looked exhausted. Silver hair disheveled, eyes shadowed, armor discarded for a simple black tunic. He had never looked more human. You're awake, he breathed. His hand reached out, hesitating for only a moment before gently brushing damp strands of hair from her forehead. The touch was feather-light, reverent. Elyndra tried to sit up. Pain flared through her shoulder, but she pushed through it. Vaelthorn immediately moved to help her, sliding a strong arm behind her back for support. You stayed, she said softly, searching his face. All this time. I told you, he replied, voice rough with exhaustion and something deeper. I will not lose you. Silence settled between them, thick with everything unsaid. Outside, the war camp was quiet. Inside, the air felt charged, intimate, dangerous. Elyndra looked at her daughter, then back at the man who had guarded them both so fiercely. Why? She asked again, the same question she had asked days ago, but this time it carried heavier weight. Why do you care so much for us? You could have any Omega in the realm. Why fight for a broken village girl and her child? Vaelthorn was quiet for a long moment. Then the dam inside him finally shattered. He took her hand in both of his large ones, holding it like it was something precious and fragile. Because the moment I held Lyra in that burning hall, he said, voice low and unsteady, something inside me woke up. I have spent my entire life building walls of ice. Killing, conquering. Feeling nothing. It was safer that way. Easier. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. Then I saw you, terrified, bleeding, protecting your child with nothing but your body and your will. And when I took Lyra from your arms, she stopped crying. He trusted me. And for the first time in my miserable existence, I wanted to be worthy of that trust. He lifted his eyes to hers. The ice was completely gone. What remained was raw, burning vulnerability. I have never had anything that was truly mine, Elyndra. Not like this. Not something worth protecting with my life. You and Lyra, you make me feel. You make me remember that I am more than just a weapon. Tears slipped down Elyndra's cheeks. She reached up with her uninjured hand and touched his face, tracing the sharp line of his jaw, the scar that ran along it. And I hated you, she whispered. I still want to hate you for what you took from me. But I can't anymore. Not when I see how you look at my daughter. Not when you held me while I was bleeding and begged me to stay. Vaelthorn leaned into her touch, closing his eyes for a moment as if her hand was the only thing anchoring him to the world. I know I don't deserve you, he said, voice breaking. I destroyed your home. Your family. And yet, I'm too selfish to let you go. I want you, Elyndra. Not as a captive. Not as a prize. As my mate. As my queen. As the woman who melted the coldest heart in the realm. The confession hung in the air between them, powerful, possessive, and achingly sincere. Elyndra's heart pounded. Fear and longing warred inside her chest. She was still healing. Still grieving. But in this moment, wrapped in the warmth of his presence and the safety he had fought to provide, she made her choice. She leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. I'm scared, she admitted. But I don't want to run from you anymore. Vaelthorn let out a shaky breath, almost a growl, and wrapped his arms around her carefully, mindful of her injury. He held her like she was the most precious thing he had ever claimed. Like he would burn the world again if it tried to take her from him. You are mine now, he whispered against her hair, the words both a vow and a promise. And I am yours. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Lyra stirred in her nest and let out a small, contented sound as if approving the moment. For the first time since the raid, Elyndra smiled. Small, tentative, but real. The coldest Alpha Prince had finally broken. And in his place stood a man who would move mountains for the woman and child who had taught him how to feel again. Chapter 8. The War Council gathered under a pale winter sun 3 days later. Prince Vaelthorn stood at the head of the table, tall and commanding as ever, but something fundamental had shifted. The ice that once defined him had thawed into something stronger, tempered steel wrapped around a burning core. Elyndra stood beside him, her shoulders still bandaged but healing well. Lyra rested peacefully in a soft carrier against her chest. She no longer felt like a captive. He felt like she belonged. Lord Kaelin had been banished. The traitors within the camp had been dealt with. And now, as his generals looked on, Vaelthorn made his declaration. I am taking a mate, he announced, his voice carrying across the assembled warriors. Elyndra of Blackthorn Village will be my Luna. My queen. Any who wish to challenge this union will answer to me directly. A stunned silence fell. Then one by one the generals lowered their heads in respect. Even the most hardened among them could see the truth. Their prince had changed. Later that evening, in the quiet of their tent, Vaelthorn dropped to one knee before Elyndra. He took her hands in his and looked up at her with eyes that held no more walls. I have conquered kingdoms, he said, voice deep and steady, but you conquered me. From the moment I held Lyra in my arms, I knew my life would never be the same. You taught me that strength is not the absence of feeling, it is the courage to protect what matters most. Elyndra's eyes filled with tears as she pulled him to his feet. And you showed me that even the coldest heart can learn to love, she whispered. I choose you, Vaelthorn. Not as your captive, but as your equal. Your mate. Your family. He kissed her then, slow, deep, and full of all the words they had yet to speak. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, possessive, tender, and filled with promise. As the sun set over the war camp, the coldest Alpha Prince held his new family close. Lyra slept between them, safe and loved. Elyndra rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. In the quiet moments that followed, Vaelthorn spoke the words that would become legend among their people. Love is not born from perfection, he murmured, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned truth. It is born when the broken find someone willing to hold their pieces until they heal. You didn't just melt my ice, Elyndra. You taught me how to feel the warmth again. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed the emotional journey of Prince Vaelthorn and Elyndra, please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, what was your favorite moment? New stories drop every week. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you never miss one.